sneak up on me like that. Jesus. 2, 3, 4. Do 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 do. Beep ba 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 ba. It's Wednesday. Really committed to the coughing bit there, huh? For picks of the week. Da da ba da ba da. So obviously it's not Wednesday. When has that ever mattered? I was gonna do this last night when I got home, but I was in no mood. The thing about having to ride the bus and stuff, it's not the end of the world. Thousands of people do it every day in this very city, and they do it. It's whatever. It's the notion that I have to start paying for it come January that really irritates me. When you go to your job, do you ever just not show up? Or you show up an hour late and your boss goes, "What the hell?" And you go, "Just ride was canceled." I mean, it's preposterous. Anyway, enough about you. So for this week, I finally got finally he says. I've been working at the shop now for almost 3 months, 2.5 months, and it was great at first because it was a few extra bucks rolling in and a few less dollars that I was spending direct out of my pocket on funny books. But then, of course, as so often happens, I went a little bananas and I started buying so many comics that it was ridiculous. Plus, on top of the fact that I don't need any more reading material. The fact that I buy comic books weekly is already pretty insane. That I'm going to add on top of that. Neither here nor there. I'm not going to stop anytime soon, God knows. But I am trying to cut back at least. So yesterday I was able to get my week's worth of books without touching any of my, money in the bank. What little of it there is. And I think I have one. There's one Jeff Smith book I have in my locker there that I might try to get today. But yeah, that's a discussion for another day. This is all to say that there weren't any new books this week. I'm not going to not try new books because also now that I'm there 3 days a week, I have a much clearer idea of what's come in and what's new and what's not. And sometimes I'll have stuff on my list that I want to check out that he will not have ordered, and then I just drop it. I'm like, all right, that's fine. I'm not going to have him order something that I just want to look at first. So, also, I'm super sore. I moved. You think I would know now, but there's got to be at least 60 long boxes in the back room, and I had to shuffle them all out because I needed to find a specific box of 3 Jokers that he was looking for. And plus, also, I needed to shuffle the ones I'd already checked into the back. Buried them, as we call them. That's what I call it. So now I'm all sore. My neck is all... And then just being enraged the entire way home. It took me 3 hours to get home last night. That's preposterous. I could have walked home in that time. The only reason I didn't is because my neck was sore. Anyway. Oh, also big shout out to Lyft for surge pricing when it's raining out. I hope you all rot in hell today, if possible. So what I have for this... This is why I didn't want to do it last night, because this would have gone on for another 15 minutes. What I got here are a couple of number 2s. Number 2 issues that I'm looking for. There was actually like 2 or 3 others in the stack. And if they move me to talk about them, I'll bring them in next week. But first up with Newburn number 2. This is a book I talked about just a couple weeks ago. I want to say number 1. It doesn't even feel like it's been a month, although I suppose it probably has. This was my every week. I don't know if you're interested, but the Galaxy of Comics, the shop that I work at, has a newsletter that they send out weekly, which I don't even get somehow. You go to their website. Let's sign up for it together. And every week, me, Abel, and John, who are like the staff, we write recommendations of the week. So each of us pick one. Please sign up for this newsletter. That's a good question. You can find it online somewhere. And what do I need it for? So every week, each one of us writes a recommendation, and this was mine for this week because I feel like a lot of people have been sleeping on this book. It's marquee talent. You got Chip Zdarsky writing it and Jacob Phillips drawing it. Even if Jacob Phillips wasn't killing it on That Texas Blood right now, he's a draw because he's the son of Sean Phillips, and they do have very similar styles, and they're both very good artists. And then Chip Zdarsky is, a pretty hot shit writer, and this is the nice thing. I guess it's not really a new thing because this goes back to like the Vertigo days, but superhero writers, the best superhero writers anyway, start out as really good indie writers, which makes sense, right? I mean, you got to start somewhere, and the indies are usually now a lot of guys will stay in the indies, and nobody can blame them because as much money as you might get for working for the big two, which to my understanding is not as much as you think, and also the real draw for people like me anyway would be just to play with that toy box. I would love to write for Marvel Comics. I'm not even particularly keen on writing comics. I like writing fiction. um, I've written a good chunk of nonfiction over the years. Obviously I write jokes. I don't know how obvious that is. I write jokes. But comic book writing, and I have taken a stab at it here and there, but not in like a decade because I kind of want to keep comic books as a hobby. I hate using that word. It just sounds dumb for one thing. And also because it doesn't quite encapsulate. This isn't a hobby for me. Playing the little happy color app on my phone, that's a hobby. This is a lifestyle, is how I've always preferred to think of it. It's like Jeff Spicoli. It's a way of looking at that comic book collection, saying, "Hey, bud, let's party." But again, I digress. No, so Chip Zdarsky, Chip Zdarsky started out as the artist, or what I first knew him was the artist for Sex Criminals, which he did with Matt Fraction, and which I didn't like. And then shortly thereafter, Zdarsky started writing Howard the Duck, which for some reason that was one of the few titles at the time. Well, actually, I don't think it was that few because I think it was around that time that I was not actually working on the comic shop. This is only for me, for my own sort of OCD tendencies. I often say that I worked at the comic book store from 2005 until 2018, and that's mostly true. But there was chunks of time where I wasn't working there at all. And 2014, from like mid 2014 when I started working at the American Comedy Company up until I quit there, which would have been 2016, late 2016. Yeah, that sounds right. So it was late 2016, early 2017. I went back to working at the shop, but I only for the social media. So I wasn't even actually in the shop anymore because I couldn't stand the owner. Bobby, if you're seeing this, go fuck yourself. So I just needed to get all of that out of my system. I have some more rage in my system. Granddad might have to have a jazz cigarette before he goes to work today because I don't think I can take this commute straight. Zdarsky. That's who I was talking about. So Zdarsky started on Sex Criminals, which I dropped after a few issues because I didn't like it. At that point, Matt Fraction, I had been a big fan of his, but at that point, I had lost interest. I think he was losing interest in comics in general, I don't know. He was still right. He was writing Adventure Man recently, which I tried and also didn't like. I think he's done. He did a book called Odyssey, which is spelled ODY-C, with Brandon Graham. Yeah, who is an incredible artist. I might have that name wrong, but that guy, and if I'm not mistaken, that guy also drew Sea of Stars, which I also didn't like, even though it was written by Aaron and Latour. It's a weird thing. There's a lot of writers that I'll buy anything with their names on, and that number only grows by the day. It seems like there's always new writers, and I'm like, after a while, I'm like, oh wow, it's one of those things. Zeb Wells is one of those recently. All the X writers, Zeb Wells, Teenie Howard, Vita Ayala, um, Benjamin Percy, although he wrote a book that I really did not care for, that I can't remember the name of right now, which is fine. I keep getting off on a little tangent here, which is perfectly acceptable. Excuse me. Talking about Starsky. Oh, he was writing Howard the Duck. I think that's where I was trying to get back to. Yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah. So, Starsky. Let's just keep it to that, Jim. Started on Sex Criminals. Went to Howard the Duck, which I didn't buy only because I wasn't actually actively working in the shop, so I had to be a little more selective. That was also around the time I dropped like Revival, which I never got back to, which I still kind of do because that was a really good book. Only decent zombie book for my money of the last like 10 years or so. Or one of the very few anyway. And I'm trying to remember when I started reading Chip Zdarsky. I think actually, if I'm not mistaken, um, what really kind of got me into Chip Zdarsky was I just watched an interview with him on YouTube once, and he seemed really cool and engaging, and I enjoyed his work, but just listening to the guy talk and listening to what he was talking about comics and stuff. I mean, and that is something that I've been the last 20 years, oddly enough, as it is to say, most comic book writers are dudes about my age, and most of them are white dudes from suburbia. So we all come from a very similar background, and so I've felt this sort of not camaraderie. Is that the word I want? Look it up. But I do feel like it's this sort of white privilege connection to these guys. But yeah, watching Zdarsky talk, I was just like, man, this guy's good. And then I think it might have been actually Daredevil, oddly enough, given what I'm going to be talking about here later. So Daredevil was being written by Charles Soule, I believe, for a while. Daredevil was a book that one of my favorite books. When I was in high school, though this is going to be a long one. When I was in high school, the neighbors are not thrilled. I used to hang out at Amazing Comics on Magnolia Boulevard in El Cajon, California, right near Madison. Yeah, and buddy of mine, Paul, worked there, and he was like, I was like 14. He was like in his, I want to say like 21, 22. Like a bit of an odd couple thing, but we became friends because we were both into, uh, the more indie books, and I was just like this cool 20-something guy wants to hang out. So I was like, yes. But yeah, we were both into Cerebus, and we were both into, and he got me into like Mystery Science Theater and into some punk and stuff like that. And why did I go all the way back to this? I'm losing threads all over the place. So I was talking about Daredevil. Daredevil was a favorite of his, and so Daredevil became a favorite of mine. Not that I don't like the character otherwise, but that's kind of what started it. So I quit collecting comics in the mid to late 90s, and then in 2001, when I started buying comics regularly again, Daredevil was the very first title, and that was it for the first couple of weeks, for the first couple of months, maybe even. Just Daredevil, because I knew myself, and I was a broke college student at the time, and I knew if I started getting more, it would get crazy. Plus, I had a girlfriend, soon to be ex fiance, who was very taciturn, very by the book, so she would not let me spend more. Do I need that sort of thing? Maybe. Do I stand for that sort of thing? Absolutely not. So, but yeah, Daredevil was first, and that was when Bendis and Maliev were doing it, which was a great time to come back in. The series had started over in the late 90s, maybe in 2000, and Kevin Smith wrote that first arc, which is not a bad arc, and Joe Quesada drew it, which is he was a really much better artist than he was editor in chief, in my opinion. And then Bendis and Maliev, and then David Mack would show up every now and again and do an Echo story, and then That was years and years. And then after Bendis, I believe it was Brubaker. Ed Brubaker came on board and wrote for a while, and then it gets a little fuzzy in my memory from there. But I want to say it went from Brubaker. I want to say, I don't. I think it might have been Mark Waid next, but I don't know. That doesn't sound quite right. I think one of those other kind of young guns, hot shots from the late aughts was in there somewhere in between Brubaker and Wade, but I honestly can't remember. I actually think Brubaker might have written it for a longer time than I'm realizing. Ed Brubaker, and then Mark Waid, and then Charles Soule. That's not right. I'm missing at least a couple in there. But suffice it to say, it was just a long string of rock solid creative teams and really good stories too. I think Daredevil's been kind of like a sleeper book this whole time. Nobody really talks about it. The movie bombed because it sucked. The show did well, but even those Netflix shows, you know what I mean? Like, I was just yesterday, in fact, me and the boss were, looking up books, potential shit that we were going to buy or maybe get slabbed. And he had me look up Hero for Hire #5, which is the first appearance of Black Mariah, which was the character played by Alfred Woodard on the Luke Cage television show. And he was like, yeah, a few years ago, this was worth a ton. He goes, look it up now, and it was worth $5. So those Netflix shows aren't as, yeah. So Daredevil's been kind of like a well-kept secret, I feel like, in the Marvel universe for a while now. But it's been one of the most consistently solid books. Because, I mean, even as much as I love the X books, there's a lot, and right now especially, but there's a lot of times where I just have to drop more than a couple because they're just stinky. But because Daredevil's a really simple premise, and then on top of that, like, Bendis is the one who had his identity revealed. If we find out that the Kingpin knows his identity, this will be pertinent to later. The Kingpin knows his identity, and it becomes an open secret that Matt Murdock is Daredevil. And then Brubaker sent him to jail for the first time, which Starsky's also gone back to. Wade brought in I can't remember her name now, but this other character who was his romantic interest, which was great. And she was like a DA, and he was a public defender. Great stuff. She was all, and then like, yeah. So there's always been a very constant within the universe. Like, Daredevil doesn't really cross over. He's not an Avenger. I think he might be technically a card carrying Avenger, but it's rare that he's on the Avengers. I mean, I know on the TV show he was on the Defenders, but that doesn't line up with anything from the comics. He's a solo act. He's got Hell's Kitchen. Nobody else messes with Hell's Kitchen because Daredevil's out there. But by about 2019, I want to say maybe early 2020, when Charles Soule was writing it was a great run. Charles Soule's a great writer. I was just sick of it. And then he died. Matt Murdock died. I think he gets hit by a bus. And then they did so that was the end of that Daredevil series. They got to start everything over every time now. He dies. They did a mini series, sort of. Oh, but he didn't really die. I don't remember how that works. And at that point, I was like, okay, I gotta times out, because as much as I love Daredevil and as consistent a book as it's been 20 years of buying this book every single month. I need to take a breath. And then as the Starsky run started getting put up on the app, I was reading it, and then I was just like, this is incredible. I think I'm sure I mentioned it. Like, this is incredible. So that's when Chip Zdarsky became a writer of. Why did I go into all that? Because I felt like it. I actually do have to go to the bathroom now, so we gotta make it snappy. Speaking of indie writers made good, this is Hulk #2 by Donny Cates. Donny Cates, I was talking about him with a buddy of mine, and Jared was kind of like, I'm not really into Cates. I was like, okay, I guess so, because there's very little that Cates has done that I haven't been into. Oddly enough, his run on Venom is the only thing I'm not super into, and that's probably his biggest thing. I was, though. I don't know where I got lost on that book. Venom was a book that I had to drop when I quit the shop back home in 2018 because I wasn't able to get as many titles for a while. But I was reading it on the app and I was still very much enjoying it. And then I think I just kind of lost interest. I mean, Carnage, when they did the Absolute Carnage storyline, that's actually probably it. I don't read that many Spider books, and that includes any sort of Venom title. And I particularly don't like Carnage as a character, even as a kid. And as a kid, Venom was very popular, and I enjoyed that character as well because McFarlane was, top of his game at the time, and I was also a boy. But then, even then, I felt Venom was a little, I don't know, like the introduction of a super dark villain like that to the Spider-Man universe was like a little jarring. Nothing wrong with that, but then it just kind of it seemed like it got very kind of I don't know what the word is I'm looking for here, but it was just I felt it was just kind of surfacey, violent, and etc. It wasn't the early '90s were a very dark and gritty time. So it was like you had your Dark Knights, you had your Daredevil was pretty dark and gritty at that time too. I really have to go to the bathroom, so I'm gonna pause. I don't think I got even close. Whew. So weird. A bear broke into my bathroom and took a big dump. Anyway, all right. So yeah, Venom to me was a very two-dimensional character pretty early on, and this is a move that's always flabbergasted me, to be frank. They introduce Venom. Ooh, he goes from being a high-stakes villain to being a very two-dimensional early '90s bad boy type character, and then so almost immediately I lose interest, and then since that sort of character is difficult to just keep going, they kind of had to give Venom more depth. So as time marched on, he wasn't just trying to kill Spider-Man anymore. He was trying to deal. Eddie Brock was trying to deal with his own humanity, and now he's being taken over by an alien, and you know he wants to be a hero. He wants to be a good guy, even though he's not very good at it. And it was like, oh, okay, well, maybe this will be interesting. And they're like, all right, well, we need a two-dimensional character. So they made Carnage. And they've never, well, that's not true. Well, there was a point where Carnage, his, what do they call it in D&D? Not orientation. I don't know what he gets up to in his off hours. His alignment became good in a very underrated event called Axis, which I believe was in 2014, right before Secret War. Yeah, and yeah, so like in that storyline, a bunch of good guys became bad guys, a bunch of bad guys became good guys, and Carnage is one of the bad guys. And I was like, oh, okay, now there's something here. I think Sabretooth was one. It was fun. Nobody talks about Axis anymore. So I don't know. I think that's probably what it is. Like I like Venom. I like Donny Cates' work on Venom, but it wasn't enough. Like especially once they started Absolute Carnage, and then the King in Black crossover, which I'm still planning on reading, just took up so much space, and then I wasn't reading any of it really at the time. I did read, like I read the Namor miniseries that came out of that. I want to say there was one or two others that I might have read, but anyway, his the first issue of the Hulk was so much fun, and I'm told that the first few pages of this are even more fun. So that'll be good for picks of the week. But oops, sorry, but up, and that picks the bubbly. All right, I definitely did not mean to go on this long, but also who gives a poop? So last week I only had picked this as Devil's Reign #1. Speaking of Chip Starsky and Daredevil, great stuff. So this was an angle on this that it was clear. I mean, when you go back, when I thought back, I'm reading this issue and I went, oh, that's what that was. So at the end of the previous issue of Daredevil, which is the final issue of that run, Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin, who's now the mayor of New York City, he marries Typhoid Mary. They go on their honeymoon upstate. and the Kingpin is going through his files, and he finds his file marked Daredevil Identity, and he opens it, and it's blank. So, as I mentioned before, Bendis did this. It was a great storyline, and it was fairly early on in the run, and it became like something he had to write around for the next however many years. Uh, there was like a minor captain in the Kingpin's, mafia. I can't remember his name, but he was like a very fun, like wise guy character, wore sunglasses indoors and that kind of thing. He finds out that Wilson Fisk knows who Daredevil is. And I think in the book they were even like, yeah, obviously he knows who Daredevil is. They're not mortal enemies for years and years, and Fisk isn't going to be able to dig up his identity. But he had sat on it, and he hadn't told anybody. And so this captain kind of starts a mini coup, like, well, if he's keeping this from us, I mean, we could have had Murdoch killed years ago. And, in the meantime, though, we've lost all kinds of money and business because of this guy. And Fisk didn't do anything about it because of their stupid rivalry, Like, there is, like, this Moriarty Sherlock thing going on. So he leaks it to the press, and Matt Murdock's identity becomes public. And it's brilliant. So fast forward to just a couple years ago, and at this point, Murdoch is like, this is a drag. Everybody knows who I am. He's like, he denies it the whole time in public, except for one very memorable issue early on in that arc, or like the final issue of that arc. Um, but he publicly denies it. I'm not, and he never goes back on it ever. But he gets to a point where he's just like, my life is hell. Like, he marries this nice blind girl that we unfortunately never hear from again after a while. He marries this nice blind girl, Mila, I believe her name was, or Mia. And she's so hounded by his, nemesis, like the owl and the purple man, I believe, that she goes into a nut house. And they have to get their marriage annulled. And, it's just making his life hell. And so the Purple Man, if you're unaware, if you haven't watched the Jessica Jones show, he's a purple man whose superpower is he can make anyone do anything he says. He has that, his voice has that power of suggestion, and he's a real bastard. And oddly enough, he's got a bunch of illegitimate children running around. We find out because he can force ladies to have sex with them if he wants. And these kids, they're like very Village of the Damned. These kids, they're all purple skin, blonde hair. They don't like it. They don't like that they come from this progeny. So they help Daredevil defeat the Purple Man and whatever nefarious scheme he's running that week. And then the kids then combine. They all have that power, but combined, they're extremely powerful. And this is obviously very comic book logic. But they join hands and they command the world to forget that Matt Murdock is Daredevil. And they're like, nobody knows. Everybody forgets. People who did know, it's just going to be like a blank space in their mind. So now at the end of so Wilson opens that file up and all these pages are blank. He doesn't know who Daredevil is, but he knows that he did. And that's what starts this. I did not see that coming. I did not see that coming but it's perfect. So yeah, Wilson confronts Daredevil and he goes, I know that I knew who you are at one point, and something that you or one of your other superpowered buddies did made me forget, and that makes him furious. So that begins his campaign to get superheroes out of New York City. And he enlists the Thunderbolts, one of my favorite teams. Which is all the Thunderbolts is traditionally a team of supervillains who are, some of them are trying to become superheroes, some of them are trying just to make money off of being superheroes. In this instance, they are now like kind of the superpowered police of New York City, and of course they're all villains. So Dr. Octopus, the old Dr. Octopus, not the one with a conscience, is running the Thunderbolts, and then all these knuckleheads like the Shocker are on the Thunderbolts, and So like Luke Cage and Jessica Jones and all the New York heroes now, Spider-Man, the Avengers, the Fantastic Four, are like the Thunderbolts show up at Four Freedoms Plaza or the Baxter Building, wherever they're. I think it's the Baxter Building where they are headquartered, and the Invisible Woman's like, "Oh, y'all done fucked up, man." There's another. I love when Susan Richards gets angry because that character has definitely been done dirty over the years. Stan and Jack know how to write ladies, so she's super badass in this. It's super fun time. Can't recommend it enough. I am look as much as I've enjoyed Starsky's run. I'm really intense. This has happened a lot. This happened with Immortal Hulk too. Whenever a good run of a book comes along, I'm always intent. I'm like, I almost want it to end so I can just. Well, what are they going to do next? Like I can't imagine. I'm usually impressed. Also, this week I read this is Hellions number 18. This is the final issue of the Hellions. This is really a drag. First X Factor and now Hellions. Um, so the last few issues, you got the Orphan Maker here, right? And that's Nanny. Now I'm still a little fuzzy on this, to be honest with you, because they were always villains, and they go back to when I was a kid. Nanny and the Orphan Maker were introduced in X-Men, Uncanny X-Men 248, I want to say, which was Jim Lee's first issue, if I'm not very much mistaken, which I used to have signed by him, but I sold like a dummy when I was in high school. But they they're very fun characters. Nanny is the whole thing. If I remember correctly, is that Nanny was like this almost like robot. This thing is, I don't think they're mutants, but somehow they are because they're on Krakoa. But she would go around kidnapping mutant babies, ostensibly to save them, and so the X-Men would fight her. And the Orphan Maker was one of the first, and he's like this big dumb Lenny from a Mice of Men kind of character, where he's like this big powerful guy, but he's like at the mind of a child. And so at one point during the run of Hellions, Nanny picks up another mutant kid to sort of raise, and the Orphan Maker gets extremely upset with her. That mutant baby gets stolen, kidnapped by the military, some sort of U.S. government thing, and the the Orphan Maker, in a bid to win Nanny's favor, tries to get the baby back and ends up killing a bunch of guys because he's an idiot. That's going to start an international incident because Krakoa is its own nation. You got a citizen invading a military installation, and it doesn't look good for the U.S. government. But they're not going to sit still for this. And the Hellions help them because they're our teammates. So this is the end of that team. The Quiet Council's like, yeah, you're all done. And I think Nanny and the professor, yeah, Nanny the professor, Nanny and the Orphan Maker go into the hole. I always said that as a kid too. I never even watched that show. Welcome to my podcast, Old Man Coughs. But yeah, it's just it was a really touching. I don't want to get into it, but it was like it's an oversized issue. It's a really touching farewell issue, and it was written by the aforementioned Zeb Wells, whom I even went and tweeted at, like, "Hey man, this is a great finale. I haven't read a final issue like this in a while." And he was very cool. He's like, "Thank you very much." He's like, I didn't want to see him go, but I was like, I wanted to give him a good send off, and he succeeded. So I'm again feeling like the entire Hickman era of the X-Men is winding to a close. I mean, Inferno seems to only be ramping up towards that, but we'll see when it actually happens. Also, this week, this is something that had gotten past me. This is a Hellcop 1 and 2. This is an image book by Brian Haberlin, who I meant to look up because the name rings a bell. He writes it and draws it, and he's a very good artist. But I'm not sure if I know. Oh, he used to do Spawn. That adds up. I don't know why that adds up. Oh, did he create Witchblade? That might have been his biggest thing. Yeah, he co-created Witchblade, which is a book I never even bothered with. I think it might have come out of Spawn, or at the very least, it's very Spawn-like. Yeah, he drew a lot of early image stuff, which is all poop, as far as I'm concerned. I could be wrong. But this is this is a very fun book. The basic premise is that there are all these there's multiple dimensions in the universe, right? And there are like these weak spots in between the sort of barrier, and science is exploring these dimensions and trying to like catalog them all, and they find hell, like literal hell is this dimension. And so these police are there, and as people start to spread out, the hell cops are basically there to keep the demons in their own dimension. And our main hero here gets set up. It's a very, not untypical, not atypical cop story. He's good at his job, but somebody upstairs wants him out of the way, and now he's got to try to clear his name. But yeah, it's really good. I like hell stuff just in general, and yeah, it's fun. Good times. I guess that's all. I think I talked myself out, just like I've talked all of you out. All right. Well, I think that should do it. Oof. Should do it. Gosh, it's a good thing I don't have to talk for a living. Oh, wait a minute. All right. I'll see you next time.